Good afternoon, all. We're just admitting people into the webinar. So we'll just, let people come in and then we'll start in about a minute. All right, a few people still joining us, but I'll get underway. Thank you, everyone, for coming along to our webinar this afternoon. For those that don't know me, I'm Gerard Brody, Commissioner and Chairperson at the Essential Services Commission. I'm joined today by my fellow Commissioner, Ellie Patira, and I'd like to acknowledge also former Commissioners Kate Simons, who's now with the AER Board, and also Simon Corden, who I believe are both here today, and were strong advocates for the Commission's work on family violence during their time with the Commission. I'm also pleased to see so many from the water, energy and community sectors here in the room. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands we are meeting on today. I'm on Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country, and I'd like to acknowledge also the traditional owners of the various lands you're on today, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating as well. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge the connection and stewardship, care for country that Indigenous Australians hold, both for country and culture. So we're very excited to be here today to launch the updated edition of our Better Practice in Responding to Family Violence Handbook. And we're also launching very excited to be also launching Uniting Research that we commissioned as part of the update. So in today's webinar, you'll hear about the updates to the handbook and why this continues to be such important work. There are two guests joining me today, Susie Stojanovic and Janine Rayner. Susie is a family violence survivor advocate who was part of the cross-sector working group that contributed to the updated handbook. And I'll be speaking with Susie about her work as a survivor advocate and also what she has learned about how businesses can best support customers experiencing family violence. And then we'll hear from Janine, who is the Head of Social Impact and Engagement from Uniting VicTAS. Janine will be speaking to us about the research Uniting undertook with people who have experienced family violence as part of this process to update the handbook. So welcome, Susie and Janine. I'm looking forward to your contributions to the webinar this afternoon. So just some housekeeping. We will be recording today's webinar and we'll make that recording available after the event. While we would like to see your faces, please turn your cameras off if you prefer not to be shown in the recording. After we hear from our speakers, there will be an opportunity for audience questions. You can put questions in the Q&A function at any time. You're also able to upvote questions you like by selecting the arrow beneath a question. If you'd prefer, you can also raise your hand during the Q&A and we can take questions that way. We'll have about 20 minutes for questions at the end and we'll endeavour to get through as many as possible. We also will be sharing links to the reports mentioned during the event in a wrap-up email. Also at the outset, I'd just like to make sure that everyone's aware that, family violence is a challenging but incredibly important subject to discuss. And so we are grateful to everyone that's able to join today. And there will be people listening today who have experienced or maybe have a family member, friend or colleague who's experienced family violence. And so, of course, if today's event, if you need to, please take a break. And of course, if anything of concern, if the discussion raises anything of concern for you and you'd like to speak with anyone, we'd invite you to contact 1-800-RESPECT, the national support line on domestic and family violence. So the family violence protections in the Commission's water industry standards and also the Energy Retail Code of Practice are important parts of our consumer protection framework. Since the Royal Commission into Family Violence in Victoria handed us the task of creating regulatory protections for energy and water customers affected by family violence around 9 years ago, we've worked with others to build some of the strongest safeguards in the country. At each stage of this work, we've worked closely with our regulated sectors, as well as family violence experts, to ensure that we understand the risks and understand what works to support customers affected by family violence. Collectively, we've really learnt so much about how essential services can be used to cause harm and what we need to do to prevent that harm. I think anyone will agree that the high rates of family violence in our community are shocking. 1 in 4 women, 1 in 14 men experiencing violence by intimate partner from the age of 15. And this is a pervasive issue that touches many people's lives. Shockingly, I think in August this year alone, 6 Victorian women were killed by someone known to them. Research continues to show that women are more likely than men to have experienced family violence. Pointing out this disparity is not intended to dismiss the experience of male victim survivors, but it does demonstrate that the most prevalent pattern of family violence in Australia is male violence against women. And we've also seen the many ways in which essential services can, unfortunately, be used as a tool of abuse. For example, insisting an account is in a victim survivor's name, or holding a joint account and refusing to contribute to the cost. We've seen sabotaging services to interrupt supply or force high usage, or the person using family violence putting their account in their name and threatening to have the service cut off, or having it cut off when they leave. We also know that abuse can continue after a relationship ends, and that the emotional, physical, psychological, and financial impacts can last for years after a relationship is ended. We've heard clearly through conversations with people with lived experience that we need to understand the ongoing impacts of family violence, and this was explored in the uniting research we commissioned for the project. Family violence significantly impacts the victim survivor's finances, and research tells us that one quarter of women who experience physical or sexual violence by a partner in the last 5 years could not pay electricity, gas, or telephone bills on time. But these are not the only risks faced by water and energy customers experiencing family violence. Through our Safety by Design partnership, we've learned so much more about how essential services can create risks to customers' personal safety. So, for example, privacy breaches can reveal contact details and locations. There might be processes imposed by a service provider unwittingly that might require contact with the perpetrator. As I mentioned, usage may be monitored, and the information can be used to stalk or harass. But when we understand these ways in which energy and water services can be used to cause harm, we can then act to prevent those harms. And I think we all have a role in supporting victim survivors to recover and rebuild their lives. And this Better Practice Handbook is really a practical resource to support businesses in their family violence response. So this is the 3rd edition of the Better Practice Handbook. It's important to note at the outset that the handbook's not a compliance guideline. It's not intended to be used to assess non-compliance, but we have decided to update the edition because over the last 6 years, our understanding of family violence risk and the role businesses can play in addressing it has deepened. We've seen the benefits where safe and flexible assistance for customers is backed up by senior leadership support. We've also seen the positive impact when businesses take a systems perspective and build in safety by design. So the handbook sets out what we see as the foundations of a good business response, to embed cultural and organisational changes to ensure that the most appropriate and effective support is there for customers. And I hope that by reflecting on the principles and the actions in the handbook, businesses can then embed a safer, more effective practices in their operations. So I'll just touch a bit on how we've updated the handbook. So this updated handbook captures contemporary business practice and advice from experts. While the handbook is primarily aimed at the water and energy sectors, much of its content is relevant to other essential services sectors as well. We have consulted widely to update the handbook with water and energy businesses. We've also talked to other essential service providers, the community sector, and of course, people with lived experience of family violence. This included the lived experience research by Uniting, as I mentioned. We've also had many conversations with businesses and community sector experts. We've had a better practice working group to support the development of the handbook and a desktop review as well. We really worked hard to ensure this version of the handbook is centered around customers' current needs and what works and why. We've worked with Uniting to understand current experiences that customers affected by family violence are having with their water and energy businesses, including what customers need from these businesses, both at a crisis stage and also in the long term to help them recover and rebuild. These lessons are largely captured in the principles 3 and 5 in the handbook, and we'll get to those later on, and further detail can be found in the Uniting Research Report. You can also find many quotes throughout the handbook, both from Uniting Research participants and others to capture the experience and needs of customers. And I'd like to acknowledge the contribution of those people that have shared their lived experiences. I'd also like to acknowledge, of course, and thank many of the staff from energy and water businesses, and as well as the community sector, who talked with our teams about family violence in their work. These conversations have helped us understand the breadth of practices across businesses and were the source of where the case studies in the handbook come from, which you'll read about when you see the handbook. There was also the Better Practice Working Group, as I mentioned. 8 participants in that working group who were actively engaged in reviewing or updating their organisation's family violence practice and policies, as well as community sector experts. They really helped us understand, those contemporary business practices, as well as existing and emerging risks. So I'd like to thank those members of the working group, including Todd McDonald from Alinta Energy, Amy Rouse from Collarbone Water, Andrea Lissenmeyer from Energy Australia, Robert Morgan from Yarra Valley Water, Sarah Dewan from West Justice, Kate Bishop from Wire, Susie Stodonovich, who we'll hear from in a moment, and Kim, another survivor advocate. Both Susie and Kim did review the draft handbook before we finalised their updates, the final version, and their input really deepened our understanding of the risks, as well as the actions businesses can take to make a real difference. So just to provide a bit of overview of the handbook, I'm not going to go through it in depth, you can read it later on, but the Better Practice Handbook sets out 5 principles of better practice that we see as the pillars of a good business response. And we use that term better practice deliberately to illustrate that the work must be ongoing and requires a continuous improvement mindset. We must continue to seek the advice of experts and share lessons to make sure we are prepared to respond to new risks. So if you are familiar with the previous edition from 2019, you'll notice the principles do look a bit different. We've tried to simplify them and make it easier for businesses to apply in the work. But the overarching intent hasn't changed, and they do form the foundation of a good business response. The principles are then supported by actions that illustrate better practice and provide a framework for businesses to use at both operational and leadership levels. The handbook includes 47 new case studies from across Victorian water and energy businesses. And I think these are the real gems in the report. They demonstrate there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to this, and businesses can adapt and innovate to support customers' experience in family violence. I should note, though, that the inclusion of a case study in the handbook does not imply assurance that a business complies more broadly with the regulatory rules and standards. Of course, we hope all the businesses remain compliant, but it's clarifying that that's not the intent of the report. We've also included a resource list to make it easy for you to find out more about some of the topics discussed in the handbook, and also a separate 10-page summary. And maybe that's useful for perhaps your board members or your senior leaders that to get across the work. As mentioned at the outset, the handbook summary and Uniting Research are now available. They'll be available on our website, and we'll share the links after the webinar. So as I mentioned, we're not going to go through all the content in the handbook today, but the guest speakers and I will broadly address each of the principles and why each of them has an important place. But I would like to speak briefly about the importance of leadership and accountability. Business leaders have a real important role to play in fostering whole of organisation commitment to responding to family violence and holding the organisation they lead to account. And I think that strong, visible and accountable leadership shows staff that, that this work matters and that it's a priority for the business. The handbook includes case studies that demonstrate the impact of strong and visible leadership. And it looks a bit different at every business. But some examples, Southeast Water created an organisation-wide family violence action plan. One of our energy businesses, AGL, has an executive sponsor for family violence to drive a whole of organisation response. And Yarra Valley Water has developed a reporting framework to track and monitor a business's family violence response. Many of us in this room, leaders who have the privilege to influence systems and processes that can change the way our sectors respond to those in the community who need support. And so during today's webinar, I really encourage each of us to reflect on our role, what we can influence, what we can learn, and how we can contribute. Before jumping into our speakers, the other issue I thought I'd just reflect upon is how businesses are building in safety by design. Real protection for victim survivors comes from how businesses operate in practice, not just the policies they have on the shelves, the culture they foster, the way they design their systems and products, how they train their staff, how seriously they treat family violence risk at all levels, from governance to strategy to frontline customer service. And many of you would be familiar with our Safety by Design partnership and the Safety by Design for Essential Services report that was released earlier this year. So the handbook really captures some of those approaches as emerging approaches to safety by design. What those approaches have in common is that these businesses are not only seeing this as a frontline or customer service issue, but are embedding it into their governance, their strategy, their risk management, staff capability, training and day-to-day operational performance. They're building safety into policies, processes and culture. And I think it's really promising to see these efforts. And as a regulator, we want to amplify those examples so others can follow. So you'll see in the handbook examples. So again, we've got a couple of water businesses, Wannon Water, Yarra Valley Water, who have extended family violence to their organisational risk frameworks. One water business, Northeast Water, has committed to implementing a safety by design service approach across the business in their 2040 corporate strategy. Another business, Southeast Water, actually ran a staff hackathon to explore ways their online portal could be weaponised by people using violence. So really incorporating into product design. So I really think that safety by design approach can support the cultural shift that makes a safe response the standard response. Unfortunately, we do know that perpetrators are actively looking for loopholes that they can exploit. And so to counter this, all industries and all regulators need to be agile and responsive. And we need to listen and learn from each other, from experts in the field, and from, of course, from people with lived experience as well. So the Commission is committed to hearing directly from people who have experienced family violence. This is one of the ways we're continuing to build our capacity for effective decision-making and improved outcomes for consumers. So I'd like to now welcome Susie Stojanovic to join me to talk a bit about her work as a survivor advocate. So Susie is a survivor advocate, works with Safe and Equal, and works to ensure lived experience is at the heart of family violence reform. Susie is also a member of the Regional Family Violence Partnership Systems Leadership Group, the Eastern Elder Abuse Network Prevention Community of Practice, and a former elected member of local government. Susie's contribution to the handbook reflects her commitment to creating safer, more responsive systems for victim survivors. So thank you very much for being here today, Susie. I might kick off. So Susie, you were one of the two survivor advocates who were part of the project, and you sat on that cross-sector working group I mentioned as well. And so your insights have been really helpful. And I know you've been working as an advocate for a while. Can you tell us a bit about what your work as a survivor advocate involves?
Well, thanks for having me here, Jared. Yeah, as in my role as survivor advocate with Safe and Equal in particular, because I've been advocating on a number of fronts, as you've heard, my focus has really been on ensuring that there are the voices of people with lived experience of family violence in the room, so that we can make sure that those lenses, those voices are embedded into policy systems change to make sure that as we go forward, the services and the businesses are fully aware of what victim survivors face when they're dealing with businesses or systems, and to make sure that they come with their compassion, that their policies have practical application, and make sure that they're effective for survivor advocates to get the best outcomes.
Great, thanks, Susie. So the first principle in the handbook focuses on the importance of seeking expert advice and tailoring the approach to meet the needs of the organisation. So drawing on your experience as an advocate, what do you think businesses should consider when they want to include lived experience perspectives in their work?
So first up, we know that co-design is the most effective design. So bringing lived experience voices into the room really early on, right at the beginning, is best. Bringing them in once you've basically got your policy in place, it's really hard. I've been on a few consultations like that. You don't want to undo all the work you've already done, so you're not going to necessarily get an effective policy or procedure. So bring everyone in early, and to bring a diversity of voices, so more than one survivor advocate, because I've been in rooms with people with very different experiences to my own, different levels of privilege. I come with a decent amount of privilege, others with much less privilege. We do have common experiences, and I think though having that diversity of voices in the room lets you hear how that your system or your processes impact different types of people, but also what's the common experience of those. So I think that's really important to understand.
Yeah, thanks. That's a really important point around, while family violence might affect many people, people's experiences will be very different. So that's a really important point. You've worked, as I understand, Susie, with businesses across different sectors on many different projects, and have seen the difference it makes when survivor advocates are involved. What from your experience then, what do you think are the benefits to businesses of including lived experience perspectives in their work?
Look, first up, anyone can read a data sheet. We've all read them. I've read them. But when you speak to people with lived experiences, you get understandings that maybe you think you know what this is about, but when you hear from someone with lived experience, you hear stories that you will not read in a data sheet. It gives you a very different understanding of the implications for your policies and your processes. So I think that's really important. I think also when you're dealing in particular with family violence, bringing in someone with lived experience, they will, because we are all hypervigilant, we're always looking for how can the perpetrator get to us through this. So we will be bringing that lens with us to give you that understanding, or bring our understanding of how a perpetrator might exploit the system that's in front of us. I think also, having people, survivor advocates in the room, you'll get that human element, which I've sort of referred to anyway, but that gives you more of a person-centered understanding and means you will provide person-centered services. I also think that having that diversity of voices, so I've been on council, so you can get a bit of an echo chamber when you've just got the heads of businesses in a room, but when you bring in diverse voices, that's when you really start to get some innovation. Now, you might not take on board everything you hear, but it might trigger something in you to think, something outside of the box from what you've heard. I think also that when your workplace knows that you've consulted with different voices, that will have a cultural benefit, that employees will know that you're prepared to listen to not just the people at the top, but from diverse voices in community. And I do have lots of notes here, so bear with me.
You're all good.
I also think that when the reputation, and I changed energy companies during the consultations because I went, that company sounds really great. Reputation benefits from people knowing that you have consulted with diverse voices and people with lived experience in the community. So I think that's really, really good. The other thing that I will say is that we can give you the affirmation, because we know we make decisions, we make policy decisions. We're like, oh, I'm not sure if I got that right. You get a survivor advocate in the room, they'll tell you if you got it right. And that's a positive, you can have confidence in your decision of what you've done. But also, as I said, we can identify possible risks. So I think there's a lot of benefits to bringing a survivor advocate in on a consultation like this.
Yeah, it sounds like there are many benefits, and
Yes.
that identifying the risks and the solutions, sounds like a top of the list of benefits. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And you've looked at the handbook quite closely, Lucy, and there are lots of case studies showing how businesses are putting the principles and actions into practice. What stands out to you as to the things water and energy businesses are doing well to support victim survivors?
You know what? I've been so impressed from the companies that have been in the room, from reading the case studies, just that how focused they are on creating trauma-informed practice, being, empathetic, responding with sensitivity, having a flexible mindset to dealing with the issues that will come up. Really thinking about how they'll safely communicate with survivor advocates, but also with people using violence, because that's a safety risk to staff as well, right? But also to the victim survivors, and their ability to listen with empathy. But I have made notes of you said some of them earlier, but there were so many great case studies in this handbook. And I was stuck trying to pick just a couple, but Southeast Water had the quarterly health checks to make sure their policies and referrals remained effective and relevant. And this is in the face of evolving threats, particularly with technology, people finding ways to get in information. We know this with hacking and whatever. And I loved this. Southeast Water held a hackathon workshop to explore how their online portal can be misused by people using violence. And then they design solutions. Now, I can't give you those solutions, but that is an amazing thing. We might flag, technology is a risk, and then they've gone in and said, like, how can it be a risk? And they've found a solution. I think that's amazing. Colaburn Water supplying Esca bags for some victim survivors that had their essentials for if they have to leave. I just thought, having received something when I've gone to a frontline service, I know that this is sometimes the first act of kindness they may have ever received or have received in a very long time, and it is the start of healing. So I think it's a small thing, but it's an amazing thing. Alinta Energy, I thought showed some great leadership with debt waivers, partial waivers, reductions on debt, these things. And I think I raised this as well, is that, that it's not just if you experience financial abuse, but all the costs that are associated with experiencing family violence, whether it's court and legal fees or whatever else, you couldn't work or you can't work because of trauma. So these are just a few examples, but there's just so many great examples in this handbook, and, amazing work.
Yeah, to really, when I read through it and really seeing all the great examples in the handbook, I thought it was really important that we do, name those businesses and share what they're doing publicly. It's a great approach. So thank you. The principles and actions also talk about the importance of supporting staff who are doing this work. And I know that when businesses get expert advice into their family violence policies, procedures, practices, this often includes how they support their staff. So as someone that has worked across many sectors, Susie, what do you see as the key considerations for how businesses should support their staff who are doing this work?
All right, so the first thing to think about is that your staff, there's a good chance they've either experienced family violence, they know someone who's experienced family violence, or some form of violence. So maybe disclosures are triggering something for them, so they would need support around that. But also there's the vicarious trauma of listening to disclosures. And this is we all know this is a real issue, an occupational health and safety issue. So if we don't have the right training and the right processes and the right supports in place, to your staff is magnified. So, there's some really good stuff in the handbook around all of this, of course, and I think I've marked pages 56 to 57, outlining the importance of the correct training, appropriate training. I also had marked the great example of AGL's pilot trauma-informed training, which was delivered by a registered psychologist, which focused on managing complex callers, de-escalation techniques, and wellbeing planning. It's not something you think about when you put someone on a phone, but these are the sorts of things you need to think about when you're on a front line. You're essentially a front line, right? And it's something that everyone experiences, and we've got those figures you showed at the beginning. The rate at which people are going to be exposed to some form of violence is, it's quite high. I think it's not just about, protecting the staff, retaining the staff, in strengthening the culture of the workplace, but it benefits how they then interact with customers, because often you'll get customers come on really stressed and traumatized. You got two people stressed and traumatized, it's not going to go well. So, I mean, this is important on a number of levels. I think that's about it. But yeah, just having that in place. I've worked in customer service. If you don't have the right supports and training in place, it makes the job very difficult.
Yeah, that's a really important reflection. I agree that sometimes there can be a view that we've got to protect people from the harmful things that they might see in their work, but the reality is that they're going to come up, that these issues come up in every engagement. So protecting our staff involves, as you say, training, providing them the tools and techniques, wellbeing supports, so they can, de-escalate a difficult situation or provide the support that's appropriate. So really important, I agree.
Yeah.
I did also talk, Susie, earlier about safety by design, and I know that's a topic that's a great interest to everyone on the webinar, and we also released that report earlier this year that we commissioned. What do you see as the benefits to customers when businesses take a safety by design approach?
So, the safety of by design is embedding the safety of the victim survivors in this case, if we're talking about the customer perspective, in the centre of everything you do. But it also recognises the ripple effects on frontline staff. So I don't think it's just about the victim survivors, it's about everyone. I don't think you can harm one person in community and people around them aren't affected. So, safety by design is, put that right in the middle, and I think things go much better. It also means that you design the system from the beginning around safety, and you don't just put it on as an afterthought, because, you can't do that. You have to make that the number one factor, for everything. So I think that also what you've got here, you're trying to get a national standard happening. This is so comprehensive. You've got templates, everything in here. So I think that you've really mapped a path of how people can do that, have their safety by design, embed their safety at the heart of everything they're doing.
Yeah, thanks. And I totally agree. I think, the real promise of safety by design is to have that preventative aspect as much as possible. We're not going to solve every risk, but there is much we can do to prevent, that small issues become bigger and create a real risky situation for people. So it's a really important approach.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Susie. Is there a final message you'd like to share with businesses in the room?
Yes, I just want to say how grateful I am for all the work that you do, for being here. I'm assuming that you're all here because you care about this. I find it really encouraging to read and be part of this project. Sometimes you can feel like the family violence system, I've been in it for about 11 years, is not improving. But when I read things like this, I just think, and we know this anyway, that businesses can be leaders, and you can lead and create change much faster than any level of government. Having been in government, it's really hard to get change through government. So I just think, well done. You are the leaders of this nation, really. So just take that on. I think the big thing, of course, is to get it from the policy into practice for every staff member in your organisation. That's a big change and a big movement. And yeah, don't leave it. I think you said this in your preface. It's not set and forget work. It requires continually reviewing and adjusting as needed. So amazing work. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Susie. We're all very grateful to you for your contribution to this project, which has been significant. And I can only imagine, as a survivor advocate, having to bring your experience is not a simple thing. And we're very thankful that you're able to contribute. So thank you very much. And just a reminder to anyone, I'm sure you will have the questions later on. You may have questions for Susie. Please pop them in the Q&A, and we'll get to those in a moment. But next, I would like to welcome Janine Rayner, Head of Social Impact and Engagement from Uniting VicTAS, to talk about the research I foreshadowed by Uniting. I'll tell you a bit about Janine. She is a purpose-driven leader with extensive experience in consumer advocacy, essential services, and leading organisation and sector-wide strategy and change initiatives. She has over 20 years experience across organisations, including the Energy and Water Ombudsman, the Australian Energy Regulator, and the Consumer Action Law Centre, where we work together, Janine. Janine brings a deep commitment to social justice and a proven ability to support organisations understanding consumer experiences and improving business practices. So I might hand it over to you, Janine.
Thank you, Jared. I'll just share my screen if I can make that work. Okay. Hoping that's coming through now. Really good to be here, and thank you for having me along. This is a really good opportunity to support the ESC's Better Practice Handbook, and really it is about sharing the insights from our lived experience focus groups and bringing the voices of the victim survivors that we've spoken to your visibility. And I do encourage you to read our insights work, but specifically the handbook, to work out how to move forward from here. But I am Janine Rayner. I have been at Uniting for only about 6 months now, so this work did precede me, so I really value the work that was done before me to get these insights to where they are now. Just a little bit about Uniting VicTAS, and as I said, I've only been here 6 months, so getting my head around the extensive portfolio of work that we do and the services we provide is a big and exciting journey for me to be on. So we're a community services organisation that's been supporting people and communities since 1890 across the issues of poverty, trauma and disadvantage. We have multiple urban and regional locations across Victoria and Tasmania. We have youth and family services, disability and mental health services, employment services, alcohol and other drugs, housing, family violence and early learning. We also have a number of op shops. I encourage you to pop into any of those in your area. They provide a lot of input into our services, but we also have a large number of volunteers. It'd be great if you can pop in and say hello and grab yourself something nice while you're there. We also partner with organisations based on this experience to enhance their capability to identify and respond to customers experiencing these vulnerabilities, and including financial hardship and family violence. A little bit around Uniting's approach to family violence. Uniting is aligned to the Victorian Government's Multi-Agency Risk Assessment and Management Framework, or the MARAM framework. This was developed in response to recommendations to the Royal Commission into Family Violence, and it's considered best practice in identifying, assessing and managing family violence risks, and is implemented for all Uniting programs. I'll give you a little bit of a summary of some of our family violence programs. There's not all of them, and they are wide, and they are, as I mentioned, to be found across Victoria and Tasmania. They are all evidence-based and trauma-informed. And the first one is our Families at Home program. The need for this one is great. This is specifically designed for affected family members in unstable accommodation. We have a team, a multidisciplinary team of people providing wraparound support to these families, in terms of financial counsellors, housing workers, caseworkers, women and children's workers, psychologists. This is something that we have, as I said, in multiple locations. We have our Place for Change program. The focus on this is around keeping women in their homes. It is working to support those who are exhibiting and the people using the violence, and bringing accountability to their behaviours. The need to have a stable home for families is so important that this is another way of supporting that for them. We have a family violence intervention program, which is essentially a men's behaviour change program. This is a 20-week program that we run 5 groups a week in, and there's about 14 men in each group. And the focus of this, or the aim of this, is to get the men to take some form of accountability within the group setting. This has been really effective over the years, and some of my key team have been part of this journey, and it's amazing in terms of what the value of that work is. The Falcon Project, this is a newly funded program by the federal department, and it's focused on providing young boys aged between 12 and 18 who've been subject to family or sexual violence or exhibiting behaviours in relation to violence, an opportunity for therapeutic care, but also for that sense of community connection and rebuilding where they're coming from a better place. As I said, this is only new. It's a pilot program, and we're in the process of implementing it now. So I'm going to move to the work that we've been doing with the ESC, which is understanding the lived experience of victim survivors and how that can influence and shape the work that the ESC has been doing, and which you'll see in the handbook. So what we did, the ESC did commission us to provide the lived experience, and it was to get a focus on the lived experience of domestic and family violence, but the interactions also of victim survivors with their utility providers. And the way we did this, we recruited victim survivors from across our uniting programs. That included some of those that I outlined before, but really our DFV practitioners, our safe houses, financial counsellors, our escaping violence program, which we have run and we're still running to closure until October this year, but has since moved to a leaving violence program, which many of you can follow. And we also have an integrated family violence program partnership down in Peninsula. The way that we recruited and ran the focus groups, we have a very trauma-informed approach. This is, again, what's embedded in our organisation and the way we work with our family violence programs through the MARAM framework and beyond. We provided support and safety to the participants of the focus groups and through the discussions that we had, and participants were given the option to leave at any time. They choose how they participate and the level of engagement they want to have. And often that engagement is very challenging, so we work at their pace and they provide their insights as they can. We provide referrals to specialist support services as well. Sorry. Before I go on, I just want to acknowledge those that we engaged with and people like Susie and Kim as well for their input into the handbook. We recognise the courage and the willingness to share insights as part of that engagement. For those that were engaging in our processes, some of those were coming, they were in crisis and temporary accommodation at the time. So that was particularly challenging for them, but certainly really important and valuable for our insights and for the benefit of the handbook and for the work that we're talking about today. So overall, we ran 4 focus groups and held 8 interviews with people who were in or had experienced domestic and family violence. We ran 3 focus groups with financial counsellors and those who specialised in domestic and family violence. And as mentioned before, with our experience in this space, we were able to speak to a perpetrator behaviour change expert and DFE practitioner. This really underpinned the quality of the work we were able to do and the insights that we were able to bring. So what we heard through this process and through the focus groups from the victim survivors and how they felt when they were engaging with energy services were the same words and feelings that are on the screen now, but the way that they came up and the regular way they came up with shame, with trauma, confidentiality, consequences, fear. This underpinned what we understand as the experience of many victim survivors through their journey, but also in their engagement. And this essentially translated into barriers to disclosure with utilities. when you're carrying these feelings, there's a sense of fear that you'll have your service disconnected. This in the context of what we're speaking about in terms of water and energy as an essential, they're both essential services, and the stigma and the lack of societal inclusion when you don't have those services is really significant. The embarrassment and shame that comes with sharing your story or having to disclose your experience, the need to retell their story becomes a barrier, as do language and cultural barriers. So I think many of you are familiar with the fear that many experience when they're talking to an interpreter, and they are worried that they might know the person who's perpetuated the violence in the close-knit communities. So that fear is quite real for many community members. There's a lack of trust by service providers in terms of feeling that they weren't being taken seriously or being blamed or judged. And again, this goes to the view in some places, in some cultures, where DFV or family violence is seen as a taboo subject. And so it made it more difficult for many people to disclose their experience due to fear of community pressure or judgment. We have concerns that person using violence might have a reaction once they found someone was disclosing, including fear of retaliation and increased violence. With financial coercion and control, many of the victim survivors we spoke to didn't have control of their household bills or finances due to financial manipulation of the person using violence, and that was a barrier to engagement. Another barrier is the uncertainty of the impact of the disclosure and whether it be real or tangible support that will come, or will add to the complexity of the situation. And in response to that, that's what we see. The privacy breaches can add to that complexity of the customer experience. So what we heard, sorry, gone the wrong way. What we heard was the victim survivors had two distinct phases in their experience, and we've spoken about this a little bit this afternoon, but the unique phases of that experience have unique needs and include challenges and support needs. The crisis phase, which is a time when victim survivors are often overwhelmed by the immediate safety concerns, the trauma and complexity of disentangling their lives, has a primary need for patience and time. That time is necessary to navigate the crisis, to make decisions and engage with the support systems available to them. For example, at this time, the needs were expressed for utility providers to hold off on pursuing payments and put in place manageable payment plans until they can access appropriate financial support. The rebuild phase is a time when victim survivors have navigated their way through the immediate crisis and begin to regain control of their financial and personal lives. At this time, they are seeking financial stability, predictability, and manageable payment arrangements. For those experiencing domestic and family violence, it is not a linear process, and victim survivors may cycle through the crisis and rebuild phase many times over many years. The consequences of domestic violence are lasting and persistent, and with the emotional, psychological, and physical impacts of domestic violence, family violence continuing. Certainly in the focus groups that we've run, we have spoken to women in particular who have come through that process multiple times, and the response to their experience needs to be very flexible and dynamic as the customer relationship evolves. So in terms of supporting victim survivors through this non-linear journey, and as I mentioned, having a dynamic and flexible approach that recognises where they are on the journey will be very important. Having a frontline service for crisis only, as opposed to where victim survivors are at other parts of their journey, will need to be part of that consideration. But certainly raising community awareness of family violence and available protections is seen as a priority by the victim survivors that we've spoken to. We heard that unless victim survivors are aware of their eligibility for additional protection and support, that they are unlikely to request them. That goes to something that Susie mentioned earlier. Also, knowing that utility providers had specialist trained staff would have encouraged them to disclose sooner. Some shared that only when they were in financial hardship were they prompted to contact their utility provider, and it was only then that they became aware of supports. We also know that there is a need for utility providers to increase awareness of the broader protections and support available for victim survivors. Secondly, utility providers can provide engagement beyond traditional channels. For many of our focus group participants, they were seeking support while experiencing family violence is daunting and an emotionally taxing process. This is made more difficult because of concerns for safety and the trauma of telling their story multiple times. They express frustration with a lack of understanding and empathy when engaging with general call centre agents who often lack the specific trauma-informed training and experience necessary to address the complexity of their situation. And in several of the examples, engaging with an offshore call centre was exacerbating their experience, again because of that cultural overlay and understanding of family violence. Many noted that their phone was their primary means of contacting their utility provider, and the need for alternative channels such as chat services or online platforms to provide more accessible ways to disclose family violence and engage with their utility provider. These were seen as important to create a safer, more accessible way for victim survivors to reach out without the added pressure of speaking directly to a customer service agent and to reduce barriers for disclosure. So we identified the need for utility providers to create safe, supportive environments that encourage disclosure. What this includes, and I do know that we know many businesses that are doing this very well. For those businesses, it's always good to reflect and learn where you can, and the handbook will be a really good tool to just check in to see whether you're in the right space or not. But certainly we do see some really good practice. But this essentially is a well-designed service model with empathetic trauma-informed staff training to understand the DFE complexities and risks. There should be a process that can be triggered when a customer directly or indirectly discloses their experience, a call centre agent or a chat process that identifies triggers. And this is important here. I was speaking to a client the other day and they have really enhanced AI process at the front line of their customer engagement. And that AI is really attuned to understanding where that customer experience is coming from. So I think that's something we need to think about as we're going forward too, in terms of the role of AI in understanding where victim survivors' comfort is and what the opportunities are. And then finally, access is provided to specialist trained staff for approaches to service and payment, and a referral process is initiated. That enhanced service model can be the difference between a customer being re-traumatised or successfully engaging financial support and ongoing engagement with an organisation. Through the research, we asked participants to describe what an ideal package of support would look like from their utility providers. For them, this package prioritised safety, privacy and financial stability. Key features included the multi-channel communication, immediate access to family violence specific case management, referrals to specialist services and emergency financial aid. Consumer protections such as account flags, disconnection safeguards, debt waivers and simplified joint account separation were emphasised. Flexible assistance options like tailored payment plans, subsidised rates and waived fees were seen as essential. And there were also calls for automatic waivers of debt incurred through coercive control and connection fee relief when relocating after DFE. It's only by having a really trained team that you can successfully navigate some of these needs, and that goes to that flexibility and that dynamic nature of understanding with empathy the needs of victim survivors as they come to a service. Understanding the different types of violence as well will be fundamental here for the customer outcomes. Since we completed the research for the ESC, we have continued to do focus groups for other clients across different organisations and sectors, as they've had their own focus on understanding the customers when they're experiencing domestic and family violence. And they're doing that to inform their practices directly, and that lived experience insight that we've spoken about already today, but also guidelines as the ESC is doing to knowing that the handbook's not a guideline, but knowing that the guidelines that other sectors are using is uplifted by lived experience as well. Some of these additional insights include organisational culture. This is what we spoke about, or Jared and Susie spoke about earlier as well. The role of the organisation in lifting the capability of the frontline staff to be more responsive than a compliance-based process is really important. We are seeing a lot of regulatory change in this space across sectors at the moment, and there's a need to bring that lived experience into every policy decision across the organisation to ensure that it's embedded more fully. From a safety by design perspective, we are seeing that weaponisation of products is occurring across the industry sectors, and this can be addressed through proactive design of safety early in investment in people and the processes and policies. And again, I know that the handbook outlines this, but we've seen some businesses do this across aspects of business as far-reaching and further away from the client-facing roles as you can imagine, but with the premise that every role impacts a customer, and it's that ethos that actually successfully embeds the design principles. From a financial and economic abuse perspective, considering how weapon products can be weaponised in terms of the long-term effect on victims in terms of financial and economic abuse outcomes. Again, we've spoken about these, but bad debts and defaults, in many of the women that we've spoken to, they've carried the burden of bankruptcy, and that's devastating in terms of finding your way back to financial stability and security. We have found industry-wide disparity and response across sectors, so across the banking, telecommunications, energy and water sectors, the support does vary. This can vary because of the size of the organisation and the maturity of the organisation, the location of the organisation in terms of geographic spread, the organisational culture, and the regulatory framework an organisation sits under. It's with this disparity that the customer experience and the victim survivors experience going across the products that they have to, and the engagement they have across sectors is really complex. Initiatives like the One Stop, One Story Hub are a way for customers not to have to retell their story, but trying to find consistency in the long run across industry will be a really good focus across industries will be a really good focus for victim survivors. We see in regional rural areas, there's a need to consider the weather events and how they can have a more egregious impact on victim survivors at those times. They're often getting missed in the disaster response processes. So having an eye to these is something that we'll need to keep a focus on. And then we also see the unequal access to support in the cold communities. Their lack of understanding of advocacy and support services available to them is a significant barrier to having support around their experience of family violence. So where to from here? It has already been spoken to, but there are three key things that we think are areas for us to keep focused on because we haven't done the job, it's not finished. And as we know, products and services will continue to change. Varying forms of violence will emerge as a result. We're seeing that a lot in the surveillance culture at the moment, and in the conversations we're having, the fear that comes with that is something that we can't yet navigate, and we need to be cognizant of this. Also, we know that responding to the needs of victim survivors is only part of the overall approach. Organisations need to build capability to respond to perpetrators of violence. This is a really strong shift in thinking that we're doing so much work at the moment to support victim survivors, but we need to also address the cause. And finally, and I'd be remiss not to include this because it is fundamental to the work that you're all doing, but also that we know needs to happen into the future, but lived experience is fundamental to the design and development of organisational systems and processes. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janine. Yeah, we're really pleased to have commissioned the research with Uniting and have you share it, the findings, and those quotes throughout your presentation are really quite impactful. So that they are scattered through the report as well as the Uniting report. So I encourage you all to have a look at them. So the next stage of our webinar, I'd like to invite Susie back on screen, and Janine as well for our audience Q&A. Just a reminder, you can use the Q&A function in the webinar. Please do add some posts there, and I'll work through them. And you can also put your hand up, I believe, and we'll work out how to manage that. I might just start though with my own first question to both of you, if that's okay. You know, I think the handbook, this is, as I said, the third edition of the handbook, and we've seen things change over the years, and the understanding about the work has grown substantially, and you've both been involved over many years as well. What do you each think are some of the biggest improvements which have been made in the terms of how the businesses are supporting their customers? I might start with you, Janine.
Over the years, in particular, the access to knowledge has increased significantly in terms of the services that are available. In talking to some of the victim survivors we've been speaking to, and some of them have experienced that crisis point maybe 10 years ago, maybe longer, and their own experience is very different to what the experience of more recent crisis events are, and the ability for access to support and services in that time has really shaped that different experience and the outcomes that they've had. And I think that's a really significant, and we need to reflect on that, the success of the work of the Royal Commission and then the work of the ESC and others, the business's investment to that and the maturity of some of those businesses to really uplift and engage in this. I think that's been the biggest difference since we've started this journey.
And Susie, what do you think the biggest improvements have been?
I'm probably going to echo the same thing, just the organisations having the awareness of what family violence is in all its forms, and responding to that in a really trauma-informed and practical way to help victim survivors. I think that's really an amazing thing. I don't think that was in place when I first started on this not so wonderful journey in family violence.
Yeah. A lot has changed, yeah. There's a question in the Q&A about training, and there's lots of training available. And is there anything that's recommended? We probably can't recommend specific training in the current forum, and the handbook does provide examples of topics that might be covered in training, and there's some linked resources that can help businesses choose a training provider. But Susie or Janine, do you have any suggestions about how a business might go at partnering? What should they look at when they're selecting training?
I think I've heard from other organisations that Safe and Equal does some really good training in this space. I mean, I'm from Safe and Equal, but that's what I've heard.
Yeah.
But yeah, you want someone that's got some clear insights and has some about how to go forward as a business. But yeah, I think having scripts and having the words, because sometimes when you're in stress, when you're hearing something traumatic, you can't think on the spot. So having some scripts in front of your employees, taking calls can be helpful as well.
And certainly from our perspective, and I won't do a self-plug, but it's more about the trauma-informed nature of that training and recognising, and we do this with caution, when we're presenting that training, it's looking after the wellbeing of the staff who we're delivering that training to. That's paramount. And so it's really a focus on making sure that it's a safe space for that training and that the tools are there. And then the focus is also on not only understanding the family violence and what constitutes family violence, but it is that person's using violence framing in terms of what to look for and how to understand what's coming through the processes and systems of an organisation.
Yeah, thanks, Janine. I think a point I would make about training as well is to remember it's not just your frontline staff, but to think about training throughout the organisation, up to leadership as well. So there's a good understanding to build that commitment. As we reflected earlier, the importance of leadership in this area cannot be overstated. So I think that's significant. There is a question about the One Stop One Story Hub. Yes, that is a link to the One Stop One Story Hub. I encourage you to have a look at that program. Janine mentioned it in her remarks. I think it is a very innovative and effective program. We've got a question here around, I guess, some of the points that you made, Janine, around the surveillance environment, evolving technology. And in energy, there's, of course, smart meters and access. I think changes upon us to have access to real-time or near real-time data on electricity usage, which could pose new avenues for exploitation of harm. Do either of you have any thoughts or suggestions for the way businesses could look to minimise the risks of this?
I think this is an emerging area that we need to be conscious of because of the changes in the transition, and certainly for businesses to be, I would be doing hackathons on those things to get that understanding around how perpetrators could use them. I mean, I have my own app for one of my energy providers, and so anyone holding on to that can see the patterns of use in a day and when you're home and when you're not home. And that kind of fear amongst victim survivors around people understanding where they are at any point in time is very real and very risky. So taking that ownership of that issue across providers and really looking at it from an engineering perspective, technological perspective, and that customer interface perspective has got to be underpinning it.
And I don't know whether this is even possible, but to have an opt-in, opt-out on that sort of thing, because what came to my mind, if you're living with coercive control is every piece of information can be used against you. And so you need to think about how much information is being generated that someone can access that wants to use violence. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good point there, Susie, and I think that's an example of thinking about the design of how this information is shared and what safety we can build into it. So there are those options for people who need to opt out, as you suggest. Please do add any other questions in the chat or put your hand up if you've got questions. I think I can unmute you and help you ask your question. But in absence of that, I might continue to ask some questions. What do you see? You mentioned one challenge there around evolving technology, but what do you see as the other big challenges customers experience? I might start with you, Susie.
I think getting a consistent response from providers. I know that some people get they just mention the word family violence and they immediately get referred through. I've done it and not been referred through. So as I said, you can have a wonderful policy, but it takes time to get it into practice for every worker in your organisation. So I think consistency is really important, because part of being trauma informed is we know what to expect when we interact, right? And not having to talk about what you've been through. I think that's really important, but you do. Everyone you talk to, you have to tell them what you're going through. Police multiple times, and courts, and each of your providers, it's a lot. So thinking about that sort of thing. The technology is a huge one. It's one I'm really, really concerned about. I think no one seems to really have answers for that. Every time I talk to anyone in any consultation, they really don't have answers around the technology risk and technological abuse. So that's a huge one. Yeah.
And Janine, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges for customers at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that consistency is one of the biggest one, and it is the changes across the different sectors. So you can never know what you're going to get, but then even in a business or within a sector, there's inconsistency. And again, that goes to the size and just culture and regulatory framework that those businesses are sitting under. But also, as I mentioned, it is that where a victim survivor is on their journey and how that business or that customer-facing role understands where they're at that time, and adapting those services to the needs and that financial security that's so important to getting victim survivors back up into that secure position, getting to them be in a position of confidently participating in society again on their own basis. So having those measures in place to make sure that what's needed is provided at the right time.
Thanks, Janine. So there's another question here around joint accounts, and I know that was another issue that came up in the safety by design research we commissioned about whether there is, a safety by design process that could be managed in terms of joint accounts. But this question really talks about at the point there might be need to separated accounts, and what might that look like in practice if it was done simply. Susie, do you have any thoughts around joint accounts and how to manage that simply?
Yeah, look, if someone rang up and look, I don't have personal experience with it, but I have heard from people who do. And I think if someone asks for it and says to you they're experiencing family violence, the first thing, and I've heard that this is tricky, but is to separate the two names and if needs be, split the bill. But if you're going to wipe it for the victim survivor, great, and then hold the user of violence accountable for their share of the bill. I'm sure it's possible, but I've heard it's complicated. I'm not sure why, but that would be the simplest way. Look, even seeing the person who's used violence against you, their name coming in your mailbox is triggering when you're in crisis, but sometimes even for a long time afterwards. So just even thinking about things like that.
I agree. And the main thing is trust. So listen to the victim survivor when they're asking for it and take their word for it, because it is their safety that's at risk and that triggering. And we do see that in some of the focus groups we've had more recently. It can be a phone bill, it can be a bank account. We've had people navigating separation of mortgages for over 5 years. It is very complex, but I think what the next step is to build that into product design through safety by design, so that the products themselves have got that built in from the outset from now. And there are conversations across different sectors going on around how to do that.
And that would be building in from the outset the possibility that the account would be split, and sort of processes about how that would happen and how, debt responsibilities would be apportioned, that sort of thing up front.
Yeah, or having tenancies in common rather than having a joint mortgage or similar. So there's different ways to structurally think about it as well.
Yeah. And also making sure, of course, that the upon separation that the details aren't passed across that split line, new addresses or contact details or whatever it is.
Yes, the importance of safe contact details is a good one. Yeah, Janine.
I'm just thinking about where the debt will sit as well once you separate. And as Susie mentioned, it's really important to ensure where coercive control then might have been sitting or financial abuse might have been sitting. So having those conversations will be important to understanding where to align the debt and where to provide that support.
Well, here's an interesting question. We know that organisations are very big and often lots of silos within them, but where in organisations do you think there is the most resistance to making improvements, and why? I might start with you, Janine, and then I come to you, Susie, with that one.
I think what we see, and this is not to say that this is common, but we do see it, is the frontline staff often find a disconnect between what their leaders understand their role is and what they're exposed to and what they're exposed to, and that vicarious trauma that comes to them. So it's not resistance as much as it's lack of understanding and knowledge that what's important to embed it and to make sure that that's aligned across the business and the frontline in particular, who are dealing with the complexity of these issues.
Thanks, Janine. And Susie?
Again, I wouldn't know the resistance so much, but I feel like probably the people that have to put in all the work with the policies and procedures might be a bit more resistant. But I think for the frontline, these changes are really important to ensure that the staff are as least traumatised as possible by what they're dealing with and what they have to do in their role, and to make sure that they've got the supports in place that they need to do that role effectively and in a trauma-informed way, person-centred way. So
we also see it in different businesses in the IT area, not all IT areas. Some are very proactive and are working very well in this space, but that disconnection between, well, what does my role have to do with family violence? It's that disconnect in understanding that every role has an impact, because as an organisation you're part of, that organisation has an impact.
That's interesting, and I think the point you make, Janine, about it's sometimes not so much resistance, but it's perhaps a question of priority and understanding what to do. If they know there's an issue, actually how do I go about addressing it rather than resisting it? So that's a really important reflection. I think that resonates with me after reading the handbook, where there are lots of great stories of businesses doing lots of good things. I think that working out what it is, and that's really a goal of the handbook, is to share those good stories, so overcoming that barrier to implementation. Please, I think I'll run through all the questions on the screen, so unless people have got others, I will revert back to the ones that I've got. I mentioned at the start of the session that this work has been underway, I think, for around 9 years since the Royal Commission was handed down here in Victoria. You know, some people might think, well, you know, aren't we done with it now? Why do you think, why does it matter for us to continue to resource and do effort in this area?
I'll
You can
jump
go,
in.
Susie, or I can, I don't mind.
I think that because change takes a long time. You can do the handbook, you've done a new iteration, there's always emerging threats, and particularly technology has been a bit of a, we know people still don't have the answers for all the problems that come with technology and how it can be exploited. So I think it's not just that, but, you know, not just continually adapting to new issues as they arise, but making sure that every person within an organisation is up to speed and fully trained and understands what needs to be done. And I don't think that we're there yet, as I said, from my personal experience. And I just think also that, yeah, having this, you want to keep sharing these stories, these case studies. I feel like when you were talking before, it was almost like a, I've got a science background as well, but when we keep talking, we share our research and we share our discoveries, that's when we get really great innovation and we really make great progress. So I think that comes about in something like this, and I think it deserves funding for that very reason, that we keep getting better and better for the best outcomes for it, not just for your organisation, but really for the entire community that surrounds you.
I agree.
Thanks, Susie.
I think certainly we're nowhere near there. I think, as you mentioned, Jared, even the August figures around violence and the outcomes of that, we've got a big societal discussion to still have, and the work that we need to do as organisations and to support each other in this is to understand the role of perpetrators and persons using violence and how we can shift that narrative to uplift the experience of victim survivors, but also hold account to those perpetrators. This is something that's not going to go away. It is a really big discussion we need to be having, but as organisations as well, we can lead that discussion and shift that narrative.
Thank you. And there's another question here around recruitment and onboarding processes within organisations. So do you have any thoughts or new ideas about recruitment and onboarding processes specifically for specialist family violence teams?
We do some work in this space, and it's really understanding the role itself. What we do see is some frontline staff volunteer to work in those specialist teams. There is an important element to ensure that those people are safe in those roles, that they're not coming to it from a point of trauma themselves, because they do want to make a change and support people. So it's around what are the competencies that are important in that role? How do you ensure that safety is embedded? And then what support is provided through that training, but also the systems and processes and leadership that need to be around it. So the onboarding itself is about making sure there's a baseline of understanding, but you're building that capability of understanding as you go through that journey of onboarding. So it is a big question, and one that does need a lot of focus.
I think,
Susie?
I think that you should definitely be looking for people that are good at listening, but empathetic and not asking too many, just understanding what it is to be in trauma and how much you don't want to talk about it, really. So, having that empathy, but being also quite pragmatic. Yeah, taking the practical steps, not just sitting there and having a gas bag on the phone. It's great to have empathy, but we're not there to talk about it. We just want to what are the practical steps? So probably being quite fastidious as well, of course, because we don't want, say, a data breach or privacy breach, having that safety focus. I'm not sure about the trauma. I think having some lived experience, I don't know, I wouldn't want people with lived experience to be excluded from work because they've disclosed, but because they will bring valuable insights in. But I certainly understand that you don't want someone coming in all traumatised and weeping on the phone.
It's a safety element as opposed to exclusion. The empathy is interesting because we do find that the different experience of victim survivors across different businesses. The empathy is not natural for a lot of people. And so building that in, and that's based on lack of understanding of the complexity of the lives that many of us live, and not having exposure to that. So empathy is really important. And so how you evaluate that and how you bring that into your team will be fundamental. How you build it in your team as well.
Yeah, there is actually some case studies in the handbook about businesses that are prioritising recruiting staff with natural empathy and building this into job design and recruitment processes. So I'd encourage people to have a look at those case studies. I think that good points you're making about the need to build that in at the outset. All right, maybe I'll can't see any more questions in the Q&A, so I might ask you one final question. What do you see as the biggest opportunity ahead for us in this work? And I might start with you, Susie.
Well, I think continue to do the co-design that you're doing. Obviously not right now, but continue, like every organisation, whether you're looking at what someone else is doing and taking example from that, or trying at, I mean, there's so much in this handbook. Having a go at anything that's in this handbook is amazing, but trying to embed some prevention in there. So like what we were talking about with the apps that showed this, usage during the day, like how do we prevent that from being an issue for a victim survivor? What we were talking about with the separating the bills, like rather than having one Lego block, you got two stuck together that you can easily pull apart. I mean, there's sort of opportunities when we think about how we're setting up the systems and make it easier for victim survivors should that be coming up for them in the future. So I think there's some examples.
Susie.
I agree. I think there are a lot of opportunities. There's still a lot of difference between the businesses that we see and the sectors that we see. So learning from each other and lifting up to the level of best practice as we go, I think is really important. Recognising that it is an organisational commitment. So working out your leadership and how you can support that journey to ensure it's embedded. I think that's a really big opportunity and one that won't happen overnight. So I think we need to focus on it. I do want to explore the role of AI in this. I don't know the answers to it, but what I have seen has been really positive and supportive. And I think as some of our focus group participants talked about, how they engage with businesses doesn't always land properly when it's with a human, but how can you support the human element versus an AI element to work together would be a way of the future.
Yes, AI is upon us. Fantastic.
It's here.
And I think that point, I'll thank you for it, Janine, around sharing those good practices. And that's a key goal from the handbook that we're launching today, is to share the better practices, we're calling them, because it's a continuous improvement. There'll always be new ways to improve. We may not get to best, but we can aim for better. And so, I really encourage everyone to have a look at those case studies and the principles and actions throughout the handbook as part of that effort to continue to reflect and improve practices. Can I thank both of you, Janine and Susie, sincerely. We're indebted to you for your contributions today. We really appreciate the insights that you've provided and your contribution to the project overall. Can I also please thank my colleagues at the Essential Services Commission that have worked very hard coordinating this handbook, bringing this project to life through the webinar today, in particular being led ably by Peter Farquhar, but also Lucy Idles, Anne Randalls, Adriana Jajowski. Thank you to all of you. We really appreciate you. And thank you to everyone who has taken the time out to come and join the webinar today. We will have reports as links in the chat now, I believe, including an evaluation survey as well, which we'll email out as well. So please take the time to give us your thoughts about today's event. And with that, I'll thank everyone very much and close the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Jared. Thanks, Susie.
Thanks,
Jared. See you, everyone.
See you.